Welcome, everybody. Good to see a lot of familiar faces. We do have a few new members joining us for this event tonight. So I'll introduce myself. If you don't know me, I'm Allan Dwyer, President of the Irish Whiskey Society America. And this is a kind of a milestone night, significant event. We've done Powers events before, but this is one that I wanted to commemorate today on July 31st. I'm declaring it Powers Whiskey Day from now and forevermore, but then we'll get into the specifics of that. But Milestone Day, this is the 50-year anniversary of the closing of John's Lane Distillery in Dublin. So we're going to celebrate the Powers brand. We're going to weave in some history about the distillery. Along the way, we've got three whiskeys that are going to be the focus of tonight's event. I know many of you have a wide range of powers expressions that I'm sure you'll be enjoying as we go, but we'll focus on three in particular. This is going to become in my mind, a tradition that we'll do each year, and I've already kind of lined up in my head how I want to do it next year and the year after, focusing on different powers whiskeys, different um, parts of the history of the brand and things. So I think we can make this a pretty fun annual event. Um, but kind of the way this all started was I was curious about some things related to powers, so I contacted Carol Quinn down in Midleton, who's the archivist and historian for Irish distillers, and just had asked her kind of just point blank question when if she could have a very specific date on when John's Lane closed. Because if you go on the internet, you get a lot of different dates. But I was able to confirm that July 31st, 1976 was the day that the doors officially closed. And I think I got that answer right around this time last year, coincidentally. I think it was maybe a couple days later. So I was like, oh, we just missed it. So I had been planning then for the next year to kind of commemorate this day. So this will be the inaugural Powers Whiskey Day. And just, works out well anyway, because I guess it's the 50th anniversary. So good way to start. So um, what I'll do is I'll just kind of talk for a few more minutes about a couple things related to Powers, and then we'll do our first official whiskey that was part of the package that many of you grabbed. I'm sure a lot of you that didn't have those whiskeys, which I do appreciate if you do have them and didn't buy the package to allow those that don't to be able to get it. So thank you for that. But um, again, the focus this year and the inaugural one is going to be on the distillery. So this here is a picture of the distillery as it looked in 1886. Power started in 1791. So this is almost 100 years in at this point. Started off um, in Dublin, 1791 as an inn on Thomas Street and John's Lane, where they built a small distillery, and then it expanded into, kind of what you see here, which probably doesn't do it justice, but it basically covered from John's Lane and Thomas Street all the way to the Liffey. So it was several blocks, um, contained numerous warehouses in addition to the distillery. A lot of the people that worked there resided. in the neighboring streets. It was quite an operation in that section of Dublin, um, and it was in operation basically until about 1976. So, and we'll get into some of that's in the specifics about that as we go along. But just a couple notes for those, history type stuff for people um, that maybe are less familiar with the brand. Um, because Powers, you know, was one of the biggest whiskeys in the world. It was a global brand, and they're known for a lot of firsts. So, one of the things that you may find interesting is they were the first of the Dublin distilleries to bottle their own whiskey. So, up until 1886, most of what the distilleries, what they did is they sold their casks to the pubs or to shops like Mitchell and Sons, that do the spots, and they would do the bottling. Um, and it was just a convenient way to do it. Um, Powers was considered one of the most premium whiskeys and wanted to get back control of their product because one of the things when you sell the casks to the pubs, you kind of gave up control in terms of what they might do with it. They could water it down or they could add other things or what have you. So in 1886, they bottled their own whiskey, first ones to do that. And what they did was they wanted to make sure that people knew it was their whiskey and it was the best whiskey. So they created the gold label, which has become kind of famous and what Powers is known for, the gold label. Um, and it goes a little bit beyond that too, because they actually used a very expensive bronze ink to create the gold label. So they didn't really spare any expense to do it. Um, but that's how the gold label was born, and variations of it still exist today. The brand is still known, the blend is still known as the gold label. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that so more or less for the first 100 years or so, they were producing whiskey and just selling it more or less by in bulk by the cask. So it wasn't until now that they actually started bottling. Um, because they were a premium whiskey, they not everybody could get it, and they wanted to make sure that they could get their product to more people. So they actually invented what became known as the baby power. Um, and that was provided to people that acquired the package. Um, so baby power came about in a couple years after they first started bottling, 1889. And it was kind of a big deal at the time. Actually, so the ones that you guys have are 50 ml, and that's typically um, what you'll find. I mean, some of you might find some of the old ones, but the original uh, baby power was actually 71 milliliters. So it was a little bit bigger than what we're used to today. I think the other significant part of it too was that it actually had a cork and you can see here the apparatus to take the cork out. So it was really kind of an actual just miniature bottle. Um, so it was, um, a little bit complicated to make, but they were the first ones, and so you can kind of give Powers credit for creating the miniature as well. Um, at the time when this was done, and until also all during the 19th century and most of the good half of the 20th century. The Powers brand was a pot still, pure pot still. So these original um, baby Powers were actually what they would have called pure pot still. Today we'd call it single pot still. What you have um, today, most likely, unless some of you have some of these originals, which you might find in auction sites, for example. But the Powers, the baby Powers that you know today is a blend. It's basically the what we know now is the Powers Gold. So this gives you a little bit of a better picture of kind of what it looked like. So it was a pretty impressive, and it actually just it allowed people to be able to sample the whiskey that maybe couldn't afford to buy a full bottle. But so kind of this is all leading up to if you have the baby Powers. So I have one here. It's the you know what we know now is the gold label, which is the red label design with the iconic red P. So today it's a 43.2% ABV blend. Um, I think some of them that you find in Dublin are still the old 40 percenters. Uh, but and the original was a different ABV, of course, too, back 100 years ago. So it's changed over time. But what you can buy today and what was sent out in the packages are at the 43.2% ABV. So we'll kick off this with just kind of the official toast using the Powers Gold blend. So sláinte, everyone.
Sláinte. Alan, Michael Calabria, a quick question. Did you happen to ask Carol why there's no gold label on the gold label?
No, and I wouldn't ask her that.
Okay.
I know some people
Well,
get all bent out of shape about that, but um, I I don't personally. But
it just seems odd that you're calling it a gold label and and there's no gold on it, like the old ones.
yeah,
Yeah, I saved this because it's a classic.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know a lot of
And
people like the prior iteration bottles. I personally did not because I didn't think they um, adhered to kind of the history of the brand. I think if you go back an iteration from the prior one, those were probably because those actually had both the gold label and the red iconic P. So I like the fact that they brought the iconic P back because the prior iterations didn't have that. I thought they were the least um, kind of iconic of all the labels they've done. So I guess maybe in the next rebrand that they'll do, because they all do it pretty much, maybe what they'll do is because I know a lot of people comment on this, they'll bring back the gold part, at least for the blend. Um, but I do like the fact that they brought back the powers, the word powers in this way, and the red P. I'm representing, tonight my shirt. So this is the old school classic. But yeah, we didn't I'm not going to get into the bottle design stuff. I think again so I have um kind of laid out, nothing's etched in stone, so to speak, but a topic for the future, or one of the topics for down the road in a kind of and making this an annual event could be the bottle designs, because the idea behind this when they did this redesign a couple of years ago was the bottle was done in the shape of the stills, and they brought back the iconic P. different colors depending on the expression. We'll see another one with the cast strength in a few minutes, but um, that could be an interesting topic because I know I have, and I know a lot of you do too, have a lot of the older bottle versions, and everybody kind of has their favorite. The good news is that they've changed the bottle design over the years and labels, but they really haven't changed what goes in the bottles.
The juice, yeah.
I'm sorry?
They haven't changed the juice, yeah.
Yeah. So, which is, probably the most important. And if you really like an old bottle design, I think as I know a lot of people do with a lot of different brands, they just keep refilling their favorite, actual physical bottles. So there's always ways around it. But the Powers Gold blend um, gave you these are the official tasting notes that you can find, on the website for Powers. Um, but this really is one of the best blends, I think, in my opinion, that you can get for a lot of reasons. If you like the pot still style, um, this blend has upwards of 80 percent of it is pot still. So it's a blend, but it's a very small component grain as part of the overall blend. Um, it's also very inexpensive, relatively speaking. So um, it's pretty affordable. It's a great everyday drinker. It's got that great pot still spice to it. Um, the blend itself is exclusively bourbon cask matured. So, again, I think a lot of times would you kind of differentiate within Midleton anyway. Jameson's much more of a sherry matured blend. It's also heavy, pot still, not as high a pot still component as Powers, but it's a sherry blend. Um, I think the other kind of blend that gets attention is from Bushmills, um, because with the Black Bush, because that's another sherry high malt blend. So this is just a pretty unique blend in that it's a bourbon only matured high pot still. It's just kind of a classic. Um, and it's pretty, affordable. So I kind of call it the peanut butter and jelly. It's a great companion to a Guinness or a pint in the pubs. So I think everybody should have this on their bar or pretty close to their bar. Some of you like can probably, have it right by your bedside, but that's a topic for later, right, Can?
Yeah, I mean, it's makes sense to have important things very close to you. What if you wake up with back spasms and you can't get out of bed? How are you meant to get your whiskey?
That's
Right.
right.
It's also 86.4 proof, which is much higher than most opening price point whiskeys in terms of proof.
Yep. And that um, wasn't always the case. So that happened a couple of years ago um, when they were doing the rebrand with the new bottle design, and you know, they had upped, um, because we're not going to go through all the different changes that made, because again, part of my thinking was there's so much history to the Powers brand um, that I'm going to leave some of this stuff for future Powers Whiskey Day celebrations. We're going to focus primarily on the Johns Lane Distillery closing for this inaugural event. But the Powers Gold blend, if you have any of the prior design bottles, they were 40%. So they bumped up the ABV a few years ago, which I think people
Really good
appreciate.
change, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one of the ideas I have for a future event is actually to do like a side by side comparison of the 40 versus 43, and we can kind of see some of the differences. So,
Hey,
but
Alan, I'm sorry to interrupt. Looked like Sebastian had a question.
I did earlier, and it may be common knowledge, but I thought it might be worth reviewing what single pot still or pure pot still really means, right? So I remember it means a combination of malted barley as well as unmalted barley and distilled into pot still. Is there something else that I'm forgetting, or is that sort of the gist?
um, yeah, the pot still, it's a confusing thing because the term um, refers to a pot still, but that's less. I mean, it's part of it, but I think the big part is that it's a blend of malted and unmalted barley or green barley, which is for the most part an Irish thing. I know that there are some American um, distillers that are experimenting with the style. Um, the history of the invention of the style is somewhat controversial, I guess. The marketing story that you'll hear is that it was done as a tax avoidance against Britain, and because they taxed malted barley. So what they started to do was to just malt a little bit of barley, and then they'd put unmalted barley in there so they could keep their tax bills low. That's debatable. I think there was something to that, but they were actually making the pot still style before that tax law went into effect. So a lot of the stuff is marketing, but I mean, there is some truth to it. The so I think with most of the non-pot still expressions that you see out there, blends are typically malt and grain. So pot still um, used to be known as pure pot still till about a dozen years ago, give or take. I forget the exact year, but they started to get a little particular about calling it pure when it was coming over to the States. So they changed it to single pot still. So it's kind of consistent now with single malt, and that all that means is the single just means it was done at one distillery. So up until, I don't know, let's say 8 years ago, give or take, Midleton was really the only one producing the style. So that would have consisted of Powers, Redbreast, the Spots. Um, and again, and with Midleton, I think it's predominantly most of their pot still expressions are a 50-50 split between um, malted and unmalted barley. But a lot of the newer distilleries that are now doing it are doing more extravagant or complex mixtures. So some are doing 60-40, um, some are doing even less and just adding other components like rye and wheat notes and things like that. Um, it gets a little technical. The technical file, which was pretty much written by Midleton, um, doesn't give you a lot of leeway. It only lets you put up to 5% non-malted and unmalted barley in the mix, which has been very controversial, and they're trying to change it as we speak.
Yeah.
So a lot of the newer distilleries are actually experimenting and doing things that have much more than 5%. And because of that, they can't call it a single pot still. As an example, we're in the process of bottling our Mickle cask. And if any of you have looked at the stuff that I sent out to you, the membership, it's being called a heritage pot still. And that's because the aggregate of grains other than malted and unmalted barley exceed the 5% technical file limit. So there's a lot of examples of that. arguably there's a lot of pot stills out there that are very good that, can't be called single pot still right now. That's probably going to change, but um, you know, I wouldn't hold my breath on it because it takes time to change things like that, but it doesn't really change the quality of the whiskey. So as long as you kind of know, um, and you don't have to get hung up on the naming, I guess, of it. But Midleton was kind of the pioneer in terms of the survivors of the style. All right, so we can kind of continue um, to sip on that one. Couple other things. Just I'm kind of progressing with what I'd call some big uh, events over in the timeline that led up to the closing of the Johns Lane Distillery. So, we're going to skip over almost 100 years, call it 75 years maybe. Um, During that was kind of the heyday. Powers, as I had mentioned earlier, was a global brand. A lot of firsts. Um, you know, they there's stuff that, again, if you were to look on our prior event, and I will do it again at a future one, but um, Carol has a lot of the log books at Midleton, just showing all the orders and the distribution of Powers worldwide. Um, it was a pretty global reach in terms of the brand. But as I think most of you know, the history of Irish whiskey, which we won't dwell on too much, but between Prohibition and wars and the invention of the column still, uh, Irish whiskey went into decline, and by kind of towards the latter part of the 20th century, it had really whittled down to only a few distilleries that were hanging on. So in 1966, and this is a clipping here, um, the three of the remaining distilleries, Powers, Jameson, and Cork, announced that they were going to merge. So part of why was this? This was because they had kind of been cut off from the American market, and they were all kind of killing themselves in the small Irish market. So they decided rather than putting themselves out of business, they joined forces, keeping the brands separate, but getting more efficiencies with things like marketing and things like that. But I think what also came of this was ultimately the decision to create the Midleton Distillery, which we'll talk about in a second.
Hey, Alan, I
Yep.
got a quick question. If Powers was like a global brand before this, do we have evidence, either literary or in movies, where people like ask for Powers by name? Or was it still something people would just ask for an Irish whiskey and they
That
would?
was the
Well,
best stuff available.
it was the number one selling Irish whiskey. Um, I want to say until less than 20 years ago. Um, I mean, when they did the merger and Irish Distillers was created, and then ultimately went through some ownership shifts, was bought by Pernod Ricard, the French conglomerate. They made the decision at that time um, to market Jameson. So because at the time when they did that, Powers was outselling Jameson. It was a bigger whiskey, and it was the number one whiskey in Ireland. What I've heard is that Pernod decided to put all the marketing effort behind Jameson because it had the green bottle, and they thought it would sell better around the world as an Irish whiskey versus the Powers name. Um, which could also be confused as being English. So, um, but I think to your question, I think it was known. There are logbooks that show that it was sold. Like there's we'll do it again at a future event. We can go into it more because I didn't include it in this presentation, but um, in the very late 19th century, Powers was at the World's Fair in Chicago, which was a big event at the time. And they were there representing, Irish whiskey. So the brand was well known. I just think the records aren't very good, um, in terms of finding literature and things. I mean, as an example, and I'm not really meaning this as a criticism, but there's very little even that exists, for the launch, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, for the launch of John's Lane 12-year whiskey. Like you can't find a lot. You can find reviews about it, but you can't, like the original press release. They don't really exist. I've been bugging Carol. She's probably like, stop asking me questions, but just trying to find things and what they have and what exists and records they have. So even stuff from less than 20 years ago, they don't even have very good records of. So to think, do they have stuff from 100 years ago or more? Um, it doesn't exist, probably to the extent that we'd all like it to. I think it exists mostly if you go into pubs and you see all the glass mirrors, because there are certainly a lot of those that survive. Um, but the history kind of through, so we kind of got through Prohibition, the World Wars, the things like that. They consolidated. They did the merger of the three Irish distillers. Um, so that was 1966. Because of what was happening, um, they decided to make, which was a significant change, and they were kind of the last ones to give in, so to speak, because that, one of the criticisms, so to speak, of downfalls of Irish whiskey was the reluctance to adopt the column still in the lighter blended style because it was a pure pot still heavy whiskey. But in 1967, I think Powers was the last one to kind of say, okay. And they relaunched Powers as a blend, pot still grain blend, and they named it Gold Label. So it was Gold Label prior to that, but it was a pot still. So in 67, it was recreated. There's a picture of it there. Oh, sorry. Picture of it there that you can see. Some of you might even have these bottles.
To it, but the bottom label's different.
Yeah, so it's had different iterations over the years. Um, but bear with me as I just kind of catch up on some of the chat stuff, make sure there are no questions. I don't have a trusty sidekick with me today. But so that's a pretty big event, in terms of the change in 67 to a blend. So I think what you had then happen is from 67 for like the next 30 years or so, this was what Powers was, for the most part. I think in the 70s, there were some limited edition type releases and things done for some bonders and things like that you can find out there in the wild, maybe that'll go for thousands of dollars. But this was the core expression. give or take for about 3 decades. Just to show you a couple pictures to stay on the Johns Lane Distillery theme. This image on the left is inside the distillery. I think one of the things I wanted to point out, you can kind of make it out, but there are 5 stills here. And for those of you that have been to the now National College of Art and Design at Johns Lane on Thomas Street, you'll know that only 3 of the stills survived. But there were actually 5 in operation during the heyday. Image on the right is just kind of showing more of the operation in terms of firing up. They're loading it up. I have some images too of another interesting little tidbit about Johns Lane Distillery. So I mentioned up front how it, how big it was in terms of going all the way to the Liffey. I think it had 17 warehouses. So on a lot of them, what they actually put soil, earth on top of these warehouses. The thinking was that it was done to cool the maturing casks that were in there. But what they did, because I mentioned a lot of the people that worked there, because it was kind of a, I don't want to call it a city because it was part of Dublin, but they grew crops on the top of the warehouses, which they ate. So it was like a self-sustaining type of environment for the workforce. Had a fire brigade. It was quite an operation, but so to show you, they actually the last harvest was actually in late 1975. So they were actually every year would grow crops and do it up until right before it closed. So just kind of an interesting little thing that you don't see too often these days. But all right, so that kind of brings us to the second of the 3 whiskeys that are just being part of the focus of the celebration tonight, and that's the Powers Gold Label Special Reserve 12-year. So this was launched in 2000 for the millennium. It's basically, I think a way to think about it is it's gold label blend. So it was an age statement blend. It was bottled at 40% ABV. I mentioned, so the current gold label blend has been increased to 43.2, but that's a fairly recent event back in 2000 up until, for a good 15 years, everything was 40%. So the blend and the special reserve blend. But this was, I think, in my opinion, anyway, at the time, considered one of the best Irish whiskeys on the market up until 2010. And then basically it was phased out because we'll talk about in a minute. They launched the Johns Lane single pot still 12-year in 2011, and that effectively replaced the 12-year blend. But for a good while, this was a little more expensive than the gold label blend, but this was a great whiskey at the time. If you get, and you could get it in the States. This was one of probably my favorite whiskey up until they launched the Johns Lane in 2011. So this is for those of you that got the Powers package, it should have a number 2 at the bottom, and it should have an SR writing on the label for special reserve. Um, and I'm guessing some of you may not have had this before. Is that true? Is anybody trying this one for the first time?
Sadly, I finished mine off about 5 years ago, my last of the special reserve, but I have the John's Lane.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this one, you could find bottles um, probably around to around 2020. You could still find them here and there. Now you can find them, I think, if if you go on the auction sites, you'll still see them. But
I have one unopened bottle of it. So
yeah.
when I saw them disappearing, I grabbed 2 and I still have one unopened. So.
Yep. So part of my thinking with with putting this event on, realizing that a lot of people are going to be diehards, or what I kind of call part of the Powers posse. Um, I know a lot of you have pretty extensive Powers range of whiskeys, but I wanted to include stuff that I thought, well, let me put some things in here that maybe people don't have. So this was one of them because it's discontinued. So I wanted to include it. And then the third one, the Cask strength, you can't get in the States yet. So I figured some people may not have tried that yet if they haven't been to Ireland or had it shipped. So the part of my thinking was to include a couple whiskeys that people probably haven't had. And then, of course, do the baby Powers because that's a pretty significant first for whiskey and alcohol in general. But anyway, the Special Reserve 12-year gold label gave you the official tasting notes here, but this one's very similar, or same in a lot of ways to the gold label blend.
So, Alan, how would you compare this to I don't have the John's Lane handy. How would you compare this to the John's Lane that replaced it?
The John's Lane 12-year single pot still.
Yes.
Yeah, they're really completely different animals. If you let me table that for a few minutes because we're going to talk about the John's Lane in a second. But I will answer your question. This one is more of what I would call it's obviously aged longer than the regular gold blend. But it's got all the same familiar characteristics. I think, the one of the biggest things, the difference when they launched the John's Lane, is that was a 46% ABV. So this was still a 40%, which again, at the time, everything was 40%. This whole cask strength and higher ABVs was rare at the time. Remember too, not just the ABV being rare beyond 40%, but just the variety. So when this came out in 2000, it was only the second Powers that you could get, and at the time there was only one official Redbreast, the 12-year. They had done a special 15, but they didn't actually add the 15 for another, I think, 9 years. So up until they launched John's Lane, that was kind of the start of the explosion of releases and additions to the Irish whiskey, because you only had the 3 distilleries until Dingle came along. So all this was kind of happening in like 2012, 13. You had new distilleries coming on. It also coincided with when Midleton started to expand their range. So they started to increase what they were releasing for powers expressions. They expanded the Redbreast line. Um, they started adding to the spot range because prior to this, so around this time of this launch, you only had two, I think, official pot still whiskeys. You had Redbreast 12 and you had Green Spot. And Green Spot you couldn't get in the States. So it was slim pickings. So that's why, when I say that this was, I think, considered one of the best Irish whiskeys at the time, um, you kind of have to remember, not that it diminishes it by any means, but that it just wasn't, there wasn't a lot to pick. So this was really kind of a fan favorite and considered kind of a premium whiskey at the time. So if you can, if you see it in a pub over in Ireland, you know, grab yourself a pour. There are several different powers that are been discontinued as they've kind of come out with new stuff. So you can still find some of those old limited editions or discontinued stuff in the pubs. But let me just make sure there aren't questions. Okay. So, again, I think I hadn't had this in a while. I think I had it in a pub maybe a couple of years ago. I grabbed a pour, but I'd have a bottle or two left. Decided to open one of them for this event. So I think I'm down to one. So
Alan, I'm looking at my bottle here, and it doesn't say that it's single pot still.
it's not. It's a blend.
Okay, the 12 years special reserve is a blend. So
Yes, it's basically the gold label blend aged longer.
okay, very good.
The gold label blend of that time because it's
Okay,
40%, so it's not the gold that you would have today. Um, but yeah, so it's a similar, I think the other difference is, I believe this also added a small sherry component. So the only one of the, technically, Powers is, I think, considered predominantly a bourbon cask aged whiskey. Um, but there is actually a small component of sherry casks in the John's Lane, and there was in this as well. The Powers Gold Label blend is technically, I believe, the only one that's exclusively matured in ex-bourbon casks. But this was a blend. So, and that kind of leads into I think what we're going to talk about in a second. But so just kind of continuing on um, with just some kind of interesting images and history. So this is kind of outside the distillery. Um, I think if you kind of go, you can kind of see the entrance here today. This is a black and white image. But I believe it's the Blue Doors, which is now the National College of Art and Design. But part of this whole merger and where they were going with things when they changed from a pot still to a blend in the late '60s, you know, everything was getting a little bit outdated. They were very big, um, and you had the cobblestone streets and everything drawn by horse, trying to get things from the river. It just became a little bit cumbersome. And I think that's when they realized, all right, we're going to have to kind of get with the times and the technology and things like that. So it kind of drove the decision for them to move down to Midleton as part of the new operation that was being built down there. So in '75, that's when the new Midleton operation opened. So you had Jameson down there as well, Cork distillers. So that was in 75. That's why. So if you kind of were to like Google stuff like when did John's Lane close, you'll see things like 1974, 1975. They're all technically wrong. I mean, I suppose we might be splitting hairs in terms of, when they technically moved most of the operation down in 1975. But the distillery at John's Lane did not close. You can kind of see the image, obviously, anyone who's been to Midleton lately and they're continuing to expand, um, looks a lot different today than even this image. But Sebastian, getting back to kind of your question, um, this is 2011 was arguably one of the most significant events in the renaissance of Irish whiskey, the new um, renaissance that we're now. And, so I'm titling this Legacy Returns. So I mentioned earlier how in 67 they switched from the pot still to a blend. So they weren't actually making a pure pot still or single pot still, depending on the time, um, expression. It was a blend. But in 2011, they came out with Powers John's Lane 12 year, which was a single pot still, 100%, or at the time, still probably pure pot still, 46% EBV. So they upped the strength. They named it to honor the distillery in Dublin. And maybe the best part of all was it was a heavy pot still style, and the idea was to kind of recreate that old Dublin style, that heavy, oily pot still spice whiskey. Um, this was a game changer when this came out. I think everyone was kind of bummed because initially it was like, oh, they're getting rid of the special reserve 12 year. And then when people got to try this, they were like, that's okay. We like this new John's Lane pot still, because I think most people were blown away by this. Um, and this immediately won over people and was a big, it was a game changer. So I think earlier this year, I sent out um, kind of a good news story that a lot of you may have seen. It was they surveyed a number of people within the industry, different facets of the industry, to kind of come up with, I want to say the 25 or the biggest events of the first 25 years of this century. And the release of this was listed as one of those. And it really was a big deal because, again, at the time, there wasn't any Powers pot stills, and you only had two Redbreasts. Um, and then once this came out, they started launching stuff left and right. You got Yellow Spot, you got the Midleton Barry Crockett, you got the expansion of the Redbreast line. Um, other spots followed. So I think, and partly probably why they were confident to do a lot of that too was how successful this was. And it just allowed Midleton to really expand on the different pot still expressions that they were doing. So I think if you were to drink this one side by side with the 12-year blend special reserve, I mean, right off the bat, the biggest difference, it's just the weight. The 40% versus the 46, and the oily hot still nature of the John's Lane. It's just a different beast compared to the special reserve. The image there is how it came when it was first launched. That was the new design at the time. Um, Again, it looks cool, but it's not my favorite of the iterations over the last 100 years or so, mainly because, um, it has the classic Powers name in in terms of the font, but doesn't have the iconic P. Um, and I don't know, the coloring was a little bit different too. So it looks cool, but if you're kind of a fan of history and stuff, I find this less appealing than other iterations, both today's and the ones prior to this. But part of this, though, if you were lucky enough to get this version of it, and you still can find these floating around out there on the auction sites in particular, but it included, as Brian was mentioning, a recreation from uh, Alfred Barnard's um, the book he had written when he did his tour of distilleries in the UK and Ireland back in 1886. And what they did is they provided a kind of a it's the excerpt from that book of his account of his visit to John's Lane, where he went through the whole thing in terms of his visit and how impressed he was with the operation and everything going on there. So, part of this is it recreates the that book. If you haven't seen the actual book, but it also has on the other side of it, I think that it's kind of the recreation of that image I showed you guys up front, which is of the of the actual distillery. That first image I had when we started out. So kind of cool if you can pick up and it folds nicely so it doesn't take up a lot of space either. But yeah, if you can find one of these bottles, that's kind of worth getting. Or you could just try to find the original book. And you can get more than just the John's Lane account. But yeah, really can't undersell the significance of this release at the time. And then what followed is kind of known now as the, second wave or third wave, depending on how you want to look at it. And just the reemergence of Irish whiskey and pot still in particular. Um, this is arguably, they're all a little bit different from Midleton anyway. So Powers is the heavier, more oily version would be one way to account for it, whereas Redbreast is more sherried. I'm oversimplifying, but if you're saying, well, what's the difference? Um, the spots are uh, tend to be sweeter, have more wine finish to them. The Barry Crockett is also that's a bourbon only maturation, but it's a lighter um, pot still style than the Powers. So they're all a little bit different. It's pretty impressive when you think about it that they're able to, in one sense, just take 50% malted and unmalted barley, and then just the cuts and the casks and are able to basically create quite a few different varieties from that, in one sense, simple recipe. Um, any other questions on just the original John's Lane 12-year release in 2011? Okay, so that was 2011. We're going to skip over a dozen years or so because, as Brian was just mentioning, there were other releases to follow along with all those other things I mentioned, like the spots and the redbreasts. Powers came out with the Three Swallow and the Signature, um, in addition to dozens of single cask offerings with pubs and retailers. So that was kind of the next 10 years or so Um, and I think during that time, because everyone liked the product so much, um, the highest ABV that you could get in any of them, I think, was basically the 46%. So there was a lot of clamoring um, as the popularity just of whiskey grew. Because again, the 46% was a pretty big step up from the predominantly all 40% ABV expressions that were out there. Cask strength wasn't really a thing, but it started to come alive when you had some of the newer uh, distilleries and newer brands were trying to differentiate themselves. And I think in addition, you had in America the bourbon, which had higher ABVs, so there was a lot of clamoring for higher strength stuff. Um, so I think when Powers decided to finally release a cask strength version, um, people were very happy because they'd been asking for this for a number of years. Um, this it was actually launched as part of the
Yeah, it does.
200-year uh, celebration at Palace Bar. So they were celebrating their 200th anniversary, and in conjunction with that, they did the bottle launch um, of the Powers Cast Strength. So this was a couple of years ago, or I guess three now almost, but September 23 in the Palace Bar was where this was launched. So this is the Powers Johns Lane 12-year at cast strength, um, 57.8% ABV. This is also the third, or should be in most cases the only remaining whiskey sample for those of you that got it. But this is not available in the States, so one of the reasons why I wanted to include it as part of this inaugural um, Powers Whiskey Day, uh, because I figured there might be some people that hadn't had the chance to get this yet. Is anybody trying this for the first time tonight?
Yes.
Okay, so again, so the regular Powers Johns Lane is only 46%. So this is quite a step up. Um, I poured this earlier and I've been letting it sit and air out a little bit, but I would encourage you to try it without any water, and then maybe add a couple drops of water to open it up further. See which way you maybe like it better. But this is going to give you, I think, all of the if you're a fan of the regular John's Lane, this just kind of ups the strength, obviously. But again, 100% single pot still style. I gave you, I believe. Yeah, so here are the official tasting notes from Middle, because it came out 3 years ago. So I would think if it's in batches, which is supposed to be annual batches, the chances of them getting the exact same ABV, because you're not watering it down to achieve an ABV. So it seems kind of weird that 3 years later they'd still be on the first batch. But I tried to get information on that from Carol, and she didn't actually have any. Because I would have thought it would have been kind of like Redbreast, you'd get a different batch, which would be by year, and it would have a different ABV. If for those of you familiar with the Redbreast cast strength versions, they differ. Usually batch 1 and 2 in a given year, for example. So that's something I'll still try to find out what's going on, because I would have thought there would have been, because I've got a few bottles of this that I've picked up over the years and they're all the same still, which surprises me a little. So I don't know if anybody has heard anything on that I haven't been able to glean. But What do people think of the cask strength?
This will not
The
surprise
nose
you,
is.
Alan. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sam. No, I was going to say the nose is very unique to me. I can actually get some of that tobacco in there, and the only other Irish whiskey I've ever gotten that from is the Kinahan's 10-year single malt. So I kind of like this nose a lot.
Is this the first time you're trying it?
Yes, it is the first time. So thank you.
Yeah, from my side, I just absolutely love Powers Own Lane, especially the cast strength version. I've never had a bad Powers, but the cast strength John's Lane is fabulous, and I pick it up every time I'm back home.
Yeah, I mean it gives you an excuse to go to, not that you necessarily need one, but it gives you an excuse to go to Ireland because you can't get it in the States unless you have it shipped. But it's pretty much always in duty free, and it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, it only runs, I want to say, about 20 euro higher than regular
Yeah.
John's Lane typically. So
I will say it's regularly in the first duty free before you go through the customs piece. After you've gone through the customs,
yeah,
you don't see the cast
yeah.
strength one.
I was gonna say, I don't even consider the second one real. The second one, it's like if you haven't. Usually, I've stocked up so much in that first one. By the time you get to the second one, you don't have any. I don't have any room for it anymore.
You've never been warned by customs.
Yeah. But so this, so now subsequent to this, of course, we did the event for the launch of the Powers Rye, which again, um, the focus of this one, the inaugural Powers Whiskey Day, I wanted the three I decided to focus on were the Baby Powers, the 12-year special reserve, and the cask strength. Again, because two of those I figured people might not have had before. But there are plenty of other expressions, both within the core range that exist today, as well as some things that have been discontinued that have come up already tonight. There are a bunch of limited editions, pub bottlings, retail bottlings. I know probably a bunch of you have some of those. So there are 11-year, 13-year, 15-year, 18-year. There's a 17-year. Different ABV strengths in all these. So there are plenty of limited edition stuff out there in the wild. So opportunity to continue on this tradition, each year.
I have a 16 from the Celtic Whiskey Shop.
Yep.
It's
So
really
you
nice
can pretty
whiskey.
much find, I want to say 12 through the 18 exists. There are not a lot of stuff out there beyond 18. Did anybody go to the Powers masterclass at Whiskey Live this year? So they did an unbelievable tasting there where they had 25-year-old Powers, a 30-year-old Powers. They really opened up the vault for that one. So there are aged Powers out there, so to speak, not necessarily in a bottle. But who knows? Maybe we'll get them to release some of that stuff. But yeah, so for now, this is one of the ones that you cannot get in the States. But it's fairly easy to get if you go to Ireland because you can get it at duty free, which is nice. So you don't have to, smuggle it in your suitcase. Does anybody prefer, I know we didn't include it, but you may have had it on your own, prefer the regular John's Lane to the cast strength version?
I much prefer the cast strength myself. Delicious.
Yeah, I think sometimes too it might depend on, a lot of things, your mood, and you know, sometimes you don't want, like the cast strength, you want to sit there and really sit there with it.
Play with it. Yeah.
Sometimes though, it's just you just want to have a really good whiskey, and the regular John's Lane definitely fits the bill with that. Kind of can't go wrong. I get probably the most common question I get from people in my travels and doing stuff for the club as well as just traveling to Ireland, when people find out my involvement with this and what I do, and they'll always ask, what's your favorite? It's always a tough
Yes.
question, but this is my go-to is always just Powers John's Lane.
Me-
Most of the people that ask the question don't know what I'm talking about when I say that.
But I think that's what's nice about the single casks, because you can find ones at 46%, you can find
Yep.
ones at cask strength. So whichever you prefer, those are available.
Yeah, and it gives you kind of a nice variety.
Yep.
Gives you an excuse whenever you go somewhere to try the Powers bottling. So one of the best variations of it was that I found was the one at the Long Hall in Dublin. That was a beautiful Powers that they had. Unfortunately, it's gone. I think I contributed to the depletion of their stock.
So, Alan, explain a little bit more about that. So that was that like a single barrel that was allocated to long haul, or how do they
Well, in
do
some
that
cases
allocation?
could be a single barrel. In other cases, it could have been more than one, just as a release, depending on maybe the pub you're talking about. Um, like so, Palace Bar has a cast strength version. O'Connell's and Garrivan's and Galway both have Powers stuff. So there's a lot of it could be a single cask or it could be more. Depends on when. Um, I don't think they've done. I could be wrong on this. I don't think they've done a recent release, pub or retail. I think the Palace Bar version a couple of years ago um, is the last one that I can think of. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
The Whiskey Exchange 17-year-old, I think, is more
did that come
recent than
out
that.
after? I was trying to think
Yeah,
if
but
that was
that was a
before or
batch.
after.
That was a batch. It wasn't a single barrel.
Right. So that's the 17. That one's interesting because it's a 50% or 51, I want to say. So it's not cast strength. Um, so if you kind of find you want something, I think to your point earlier, Kian, about the different ABVs, that one's nice because it sits in between the regular John's Lane and the cast strength stuff.
So as a rule of thumb in Ireland, if you see the square rectangular wooden boxes, they'll all be 46%. The diamond boxes could be 46 or could be cast strength, but it'll be printed on it. So
Yeah.
if it's before or after the rebranding of the bottles.
Yeah, because Super Value did one. I think those were 46, right?
Yep,
And
they
the
are.
Kilkenny Whiskey Guild did one. Those were the actual old bottles. Those were 46.
And that's the same as the Celtic Whiskey Shop, the
Yeah,
Musgraves. There's
yeah.
there's a ton of them out there, but they're
They
all
did a
good.
lot. They were big into doing these for some of the retailers and the pubs.
Yeah.
It just feels like they've slowed that. Um, because I don't think there's been anything new really that I'm aware of in the last couple years. But because it's one of those, if somebody was releasing one for the pub or retailer, you'd probably see Kian, you would have already been there, or I would have. Well, someone,
Or we would have seen it for auction, yes.
yeah. Well, that too, yeah. Um, but it gives you a good excuse to like why do I go to certain pubs? Because they have a Powers bottling, and
Yeah.
I like to go there and get a pint and drink the Powers. So the latest one I was doing that was at Christie's in Kilkenny for our member group trip. They have bottles of the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild version there,
Cool.
which is very nice. So, um, just a couple other notes to make. Because again, the kind of the central theme of this first Powers Whiskey Day event was on the closing of the Johns Lane Distillery, which happened 50 years ago today, officially. So again, part of talked about before, but so they moved to Midleton in 75, and that's when the operation, started going down there. But they kind of wanted an insurance policy, so they didn't actually close Johns Lane. They downsized it, and a lot of people were either moved to Midleton or what have you, but it was still operational, and that was because if things, didn't work out, or who knows, maybe they couldn't create it the same way to the standards they wanted that they did at Johns Lane. So they wanted to make sure they were happy with how everything was working down in Midleton before they shuttered Johns Lane. So that's why a year basically went by plus until they actually closed the doors for the final time at Johns Lane. So that was July 31st of 76. So over a year where they were still actually producing in small quantities. And I mentioned too that the last harvest on the warehouse roofs was late 75s after they had actually, done that initial move to Midleton. So it was still, in small sense, still operational. But it did actually close its doors for the final time in 76, July 31st. And unfortunately, unlike some others like Kilbeggan and some others that, may have closed, but then were rehabbed and reopened in some form. Johns Lane was effectively torn down, demolished. So I think I mentioned earlier, if you were to go there today, you can still see the Johns Lane street sign in the alleyway off of Thomas Street. It's where the National College of Art and Design is today. And basically what survived the demolition are 3 pot stills. I mentioned earlier there were 5 actually in operation, so 3 survived. In 2023, our member group trip to Dublin, one of the first things we did a I led a walking tour of the group from our hotel, and we kind of were hitting some historic spots. Kind of did an impromptu little whiskey trail, but we did a pilgrimage to Johns Lane. So this picture here is us at the distillery or at the college. I think I've got most wanted signs of myself all over Dublin because of the times I've been stopped at security trying to get into here. Every time I
Yeah,
walk,
I was
get
going to say, go to the security and say, we're here to see the
yeah,
stills, and they'll be
I
fine.
learned that
Otherwise,
after
they'll stop you.
yeah. Well, the first time I ever did it, I just walked in and no one said boo. The next time, I think, they were ready to like draw weapons on me. I was like, geez, it's like, because again, at the time too, it was before things really took off. So Irish whiskey wasn't really a big thing in 2010, 2011. Now it's like they want you to go and it's part of a tour and all this stuff. But back then it was like, I was being accused of interfering with the education of the youth of Ireland. But in any case, they kind of figured it out after a few years, like, oh, this is popular and people actually want to come see it. So I think you can kind of see in the background here, the stills were pretty weathered, being in the elements all those
Yeah.
years. And so what they did is they decided to put some money into it and refurbish it. And when we were there in 23, it was kind of good news, bad news. It was like this was one of the very first things did on the Monday. It's like we're gonna go to John's Lane and we're gonna have a Powers whiskey at the old John's Lane distillery. So that was kind of our first thing. And when we got there, um, there was scaffolding up and they were actually doing the work and it had just started like that week. I'm like, dumb luck. So instead of being able to get up, right close to it, we were kind of blocked off. So that's why you kind of see us in front of the gates there. But so it took a little while for them to kind of do the whole rehab. Uh, you can kind of see these are the stills. They still hadn't removed all of the fencing and stuff, but if you've been there in the last couple of years, it's part of the quad, of the campus now, so there are benches and things where the students just kind of hang out. But the three stills, have been refurbished and there's no fencing around it now. There was graffiti on the brick and stuff like that, so they've cleaned it all up. It really looks nice. So um
Nice to see that.
yeah, it's I kind of make a point of walking over there usually when I'm in Dublin. It's just kind of nice to just kind of visit, sneak, sneak your flask or a little baby Powers in there, or what have you. And it's like going to Mecca, maybe. I don't know. But so that's what the John's Lane Distillery is today. So there's a kind of a more recent image of it without the fencing. So it's pretty nice. You might not get as clean a picture as this because the students might be all hanging around. So you probably can't ask them to move. That's when the security will get mad at you again. But has anyone been to see the stills?
Yeah, several
Yeah.
times. First time was in 2007.
Yeah. So if you haven't, it's pretty easy to get to if you're up by Christ Church, or kind of on your way to like Brazenhead. People go
Oh
to
yeah,
that pub.
Brazen Head's right around the corner.
Yeah, so
Or
like
if
if
you're
you're
going
in
to
that
Rum and
area,
Co, Guinness, anywhere down there, it's easy to get to.
yeah, it's not a long walk. You kind of walk along the Liffey, and you make a left, assuming you're coming from like say O'Connell Street, that part, and you just walk along the Liffey and you make a left. If you get to the Brazen Head, you've gone too far and you're gonna have to go back up the hill sort of. But it's on, you go down Thomas Street and the college is there. You can't really miss the blue doors. The alleyway next to it, you can see the little sign that says John's Lane. So that's still there as well. So it's kind of cool. If you're a kind of a Powers geek like I am. But yeah, worth making a little excursion. Um, especially if you're coming from the Brazen Head and heading back into the center of town. So let's do a little time check here. This so just kind of to summarize, um, I've mentioned some of this stuff along the way, but so this was the inaugural Powers Whiskey Day. I'm declaring this an unofficial holiday. I can't really declare an official holiday myself for a trademarked brand. But my plan is to promote July 31st. This being the 50th anniversary, so this is the first one, but to make this an annual tradition on the 31st and to, recognize this day, and we can do these kind of events going forward. There are plenty of other things to celebrate about the brand, and to try a lot of those other expressions that we were talking about. And who knows, maybe there'll be new ones along the way. But I've already kind of outlined in my mind ideas for next year, for example, what whiskeys we could do and what things we could talk about. Because there's plenty of things in the history of the brand. So this one was more themed around the closing of the distillery because of the 50-year anniversary. But there's certainly other things that can be talked about. And so that's the significance of the day. So you are all can say you are a witness to holiday history. You were participants in the first Powers Whiskey Day. And I guess with that, I'll kind of, we can sort of open it up. And that's really the end of the presentation. I will mention too, I didn't include it as part of this, just from more logistics and a little bit of copyright type stuff. But if you go on the YouTube, you can access the video from 1977, which from the archives they went in and they filmed right before it closed. And it's pretty cool. So you can see the operation of making whiskey, and there's stuff in there where they're emptying out the mash tuns and things like that. It's pretty cool. It's only about 7 minutes long. So it's a quick little video that you can watch, but those are the last images from John's Lane.
Another historic document too that on YouTube, and I wish I had the link handy. I can probably look it up here real quick, but I like the video that actually shows the mash men down in the mash tons in their
that's this
bathing. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I just honestly, just if I play it, I don't know if I can upload it to my own YouTube channel for the club, and that kind of thing. So I was going to carve it out. It's a little 7 minutes. It's a short little video, but it would have been long to try to just show.
Oh yeah, no.
But to your point, it's pretty cool. It ends with them emptying this out. So it's pretty cool. It shows you basically what one of the biggest distilleries back 50 years ago, how it operated. So the size of the machinery and the force of the water and all the stuff going on. It's pretty impressive. It's a lot different than if you've been to any of the newer distilleries now, which are a lot more, I guess, technology efficient versus how it was back then. But they made some good whiskey.
Still do.
Yep. So what I'll do now, I'll stop sharing my screen. We'll, we can open up and we can kind of do a little bonus time for people who want to either tell some stories about their favorite powers, or maybe some other powers they might be drinking, or whatever we might want to chat about. We can do a little bit of overtime for those who would like to stay on for a few extra minutes.
So, as much as I dislike the rebranded bottles, and Alan, you are off my Christmas card list for loving them.
I've been telling you that for years, though. I'm the only one
know,
who
but
likes
no, it's like, here's a 70s bottle. It has the diamond, it has the lack of the gold label, even though it's actually gold label. But
Yep.
no, I do not like the rebranded ones. I like the rye one that works with the green, but give me the old bottles any day. But equally, to me, it's still a marathon bar, not a Snickers bar. I do not like change. So for me, I like the old labels because that's what I grew up with.
Yeah, well, I guess my issue is more with I don't like the prior version iteration
Yeah,
to the one today. I think that's the least powers of all of them. And that's unfortunately that, well, not unfortunately, but that's the one that most people today kind of, unless you're
true.
maybe from Ireland, that's the one you know. So that's the one you kind of fell in love with when they changed it. But like to your point, the gold label didn't always have the gold label.
Nope.
So, and if, arguably more often than not, it didn't, you know. So, but yeah, I guess they'll, yeah, I'm sure it'll come back. I think to me the best of both worlds would be the gold label with the diamond red P.
Like this one.
Yeah, so
That's
like
a
the
nice one.
yeah the I like the bottle shape of the new version. I do, you know, I like
It
the
is interesting, yeah.
it's
It
different. There's
just
no other ones that are shaped like that, and you know, it's like the stills and stuff. So I do kind of I'm a sucker for that because I'll be honest with you, I don't like new bottles generally.
yeah.
I don't like, you know, the new green spots, for example. Some of you might be like, what do you mean the new green spots? But the old green spot label was great. I don't like the new ones as much. A lot of, even like some of the Bushmill, like all the rebrands generally, I don't like.
To me, it's more bottle size. I hated the early Ardra ones. They are too tall to fit on my shelves. It's like, give me something that fits in a shelf. I'm happy.
I thought you kept these all by your bedside.
Not everything, but maybe I have shelves by my bedside. But no, bottles that are too tall are silly.
Well, this new powers then is perfect.
Yeah, my shelves are taller than that, but still. They fit regular size bottles. See?
You don't.
Regular size.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna try I don't know how good this is going to be. It is an underfilled miniature. It's in plastic. On the back, it
Oh,
implies it is from 1987.
Okay.
plastic. Ugh.
Yes.
Nice.
But I mean, why not try it now? I've tried a lovely out of glass bottle Powers miniature from like the 60s that was lovely. It had not got the same level of low fill as this. It smells okay.
I wonder what has leached into that thing. See,
No time better than the
No
present.
lead anyway, so there's no lead.
Yeah.
That at
True,
least
true
is good.
enough. Yeah. What's a little microplastic between friends, right?
Yes.
The whiskey the alcohol kills all the bad stuff.
Smells good. Very close to the current gold label.
Love your tasting glass too.
Yeah, I found a set of these on eBay, 4 glasses, and I bring them out on occasion. They are very nice. Nope, this actually tastes perfectly fine. If I die tomorrow, Hank and Alan can split my Paris whiskey collection between them.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I was actually looking at the, because I think what's today, Friday? So
Right.
is it Sunday? The auction ends at the latest auction that's going on. There's a bunch of Powers stuff on there.
Oh, this is Irish whiskey auctions.
Yeah. So a lot of the
I have to avoid that site.
Mm.
yeah, I generally don't participate, but I think where they're, to me, I always find it interesting when I'll see people that are like, oh, I got my latest whatever, you know, winnings. And a lot of it's just stuff you can buy in stores.
Yeah.
I like, to me, the auctions are good for buying stuff that's discontinued or you
Yeah,
can't get. Like, so Powers
that's
is
like,
actually a good thing for the auctions because you can get like the signature or
or this to me is
70s.
a 70s bottle. I would
Yeah,
rather pay for something that I couldn't have bought at the
right.
time
Yeah.
because I was maybe 5. I think the only bottles I've bought that I could have bought were things like, oh, I want more of the Redbreast 10-year-old cast strength batch ones. Otherwise, it's to get stuff you can't get. It's
Yeah.
not just to
Oh
buy
yeah, no,
stuff
I agree.
that's
Yeah.
available.
Because one of the ones that you can get, I want to say 70s, but it might be 80s era Powers, I believe, from the Whiskey Exchange.
Yeah, there's a lot of it available. The Whiskey Exchange, sometimes they have higher prices than you may
Oh
pay at
yeah,
all.
I'm just saying from an availability standpoint,
Yeah,
that's the one place I've seen where you can get a much older Powers era,
yeah.
other than an auction site. But
Just remember, they're all good. You should go out and buy them.
yeah, unfortunately, it's even though it was the when it was the best-selling favorite whiskey in Ireland, it was still relatively cheap. But it's got the cult following now, and it's gotten popular, and the bottles that do exist in some of these pubs are pretty expensive.
But
Um,
I think I appreciate the fact that they haven't over-marketed Powers because
oh
it's
no, I agree.
still not as popular as other things, which means it's easier to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, I to me, I've always said I want it to be just popular enough where they continue it, type
Yeah.
of thing, where they're still because there were a few lean years there. Um, I would say like the late, right before COVID, where it was kind of like, what are they doing with the brand? They're not putting any
Mm.
money into it. They haven't done anything since John's Lane, it was kind of, you were wondering. Um, and then they started a ton of marketing. They came out with the cast strength and the rye. So like it kind of had another little rebirth. But
But they'd even said they had a different distribution or marketing thing for the States, and nothing came of that.
yeah, no, I
So
agree.
I think it is a forgotten child.
Yeah. So, but again, as long as it's not too forgotten,
Yeah.
it's like,
Distribution system here in the United States is disgusting though. And we just had another distributor declare bankruptcy. So
yep.
that's part of the problem over here that we have is the distribution system is just the tri-tier system sucks.
Yeah, but even on TTB, you're not seeing new powers. No one is trying to propose it, but yes, it could technically be you may have to release it separately across every single state. It becomes more awkward to do that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they could, I'm not going to hold my breath in my lifetime that Congress will change the laws, but, it's been more than 100 years since Prohibition, so you'd think that they might want to address that one of these days. But
Yeah, I don't think so.
yeah, because how simple they could make it, but yeah.
Hmm.
But, God forbid we drink alcohol, right? Um, maybe they would,
What
maybe the fact that alcohol sales are down and the Gen Z or whatever is not drinking, maybe that'll force them to have to make it easier to get it because otherwise it'll go away.
Well, I mean, there's great auction prices at the moment, so there are benefits from things not being too popular.
absolutely.
So stock up while you can.
And I
Yeah.
think a lot of these companies that kind of left us old timers by the wayside to chase after the young market, and now they're finding out their young market's not there. I think it's okay for them to feel a little bit of pain because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there would be even more purchasing of on the auction sites if it weren't for the fact that in a lot of cases the shipping costs more than the bottles. That's the
Yeah.
down. That's the big change to me
Yeah.
True
because, like,
story, yeah.
to your point, the bottles are you can get some bottles for pretty good pricing, but it wasn't that long ago where it was pretty cheap to have stuff shipped over. Now it's doubled or even tripled in price. In
Like
some,
everything else in the last 6, 7
yeah.
years.
So that's just that's the one downside because it's good and bad. Depends on how you want to look at it. If it was still really cheap to ship, I'd probably
So
have
it
way.
says consolidate, ship 6 bottles. Your
Yeah.
cost per bottle is somewhat cheaper. So
I'd rather just smuggle them in my suitcase.
Hmm. I was very worried when you started to say that. It sounded like you were going to say something other than suitcase.
No.
Yeah, I had
No,
one
not
of
my briefs. No,
that's
The baby
yes.
powers.
Well, I
Baby
was coming
powers.
back through Dublin Airport once, and I declared like I think I had like 3.75 liters of whiskey, and said, "Here's what I have. I have a big list because if they want to charge me the price per proof liter of alcohol, that's great. I'm only in trouble if they figure out it's the cost of the bottles." And I said, and I brought back 10 of the baby powers. And he's like, "You have 10 more bottles?" I'm like, "No, no, they're miniatures. They're
they're
miniatures."
this big.
Yes, they're not real bottles.
I've been fairly lucky when I come back. I'm just honest with them, but I never give them an amount unless they ask. So, if going through is, do you have anything to declare? Just some whiskey. And if they ask how many bottles, because they know they've already
Yeah.
scanned they know exactly. But I've been fairly lucky. I had last time I came through, I think I had 10, 9 or 10 bottles, and just some whiskey. And the guy just smiled at me and goes, "Go ahead."
Maybe it was
I'll
too honest,
say,
but I've been literal. It's like Pachin is not whiskey.
Yeah.
Boylock's New Make is not whiskey. Those things aren't whiskey. It's like, yeah, I got some stuff. Or else I'll go, I've got magazines for my wife, but I don't think you care about those. So
I
it,
usually
it
just say
depends on who you speak to.
when they say, "Do you have anything to declare?" I usually just say something like, "I had a great time," or yeah,
I mean, you could say
I,
owning my genius if you want to copy
yeah.
Oscar Wilde.
The weather, it rained a lot. You just like, you know, oh, you meant, did I bring anything back? You weren't specific, so
You
that's my.
you mentioned Pachin, and it brings back a memory. In 2007, I was out west, um, just north of Connemara,
Yeah.
and I was staying in a really nice B&B, nice old couple out there, and the gentleman, he and I got talking about whiskey and stuff, and he said, "Have you ever had any real Pachin?" And I said, "No." I said at that point the only Pachin I'd ever had was the Bunratty stuff,
Yeah.
and he goes, "Hang on a second." So he goes, and literally when he said, "Hang on a second," the lady of the house shouts in from the kitchen, "Don't give him any of that poison." It was some of the best stuff I've ever
Yeah.
tasted, though. It was just really it was sweet and flavorful and powerful, but it was, and he said the old gaffer down the road makes it at Christmas time and gives it out for Christmas gifts.
Yep.
But he had gotten busted by the guards, and was had to go to court because they were doing one of their things, the
Yes.
show, yeah. And he showed up in court, and the judge goes, "Okay, well, we're gonna have to fine you." He fined him a few pounds. I think it was like 10 or 15 pounds or something like that. And when the judge sentenced him to the fine, he goes, "Well, I know somebody who's not getting their Christmas bonus this year."
That would be absolutely true, and I can completely believe it. And
Yeah.
for anyone that hasn't seen, there's a series of three movies. It's called The Rising of the Moon. It's directed by Tyrone Power introduced them, but the first of the three movies in that is literally about that someone being fined for poaching buying. But yeah, we went to, so I'm from Dublin, my wife's Californian, but she has family from Ireland. We found where someone in our family lived. They'd moved back to the States before the famine. And we're down looking at the fields, and an old gentleman who lived above the house comes down. And my wife's like, why were there so many police barracks around here? He's like, "Do you really want to know?" She's like, "It's the poaching making." But it used to always be there. The Bunratty stuff is terrible. You're getting better stuff now. Blaylock released lovely poachings, but they can't afford to pay for a poaching license. It was like £1,000 a year, and Michael was like, "That's not worth my while." So
The
like
Mickle, the
Killowen
Mickle
do stuff,
stuff's very good.
Copeland do stuff, Mickle do stuff. There's
Yes,
great
Alan,
stuff
that's what I
out
was going to say, the
available.
Mickle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was back last, I got the Amontillado finished poaching that was lovely from Mickle.
Really, in Amontillado casks?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Oh,
yeah, they've got I forget how to pronounce it, the ones that they rest in casks for a few weeks.
Yep.
Nice.
Because when we did our launch on the cask for Mickle, we did the samples I provided were the poachine were in the chestnut cask. Did anybody break out a Powers whiskey tonight that wasn't part of the featured stuff? Can you
I mean, I'll go with my
Three
70s
swallow.
non-gold label. This was
Okay.
close. The Special Reserve was probably the closest one to this, but this was from John's Lane. It's from the 70s. I do have a bottle of the pot still one from the 60s. I have not opened it yet, and I fully expect when I do open it, the cork will fall apart.
Yep.
So that is being saved for a special occasion.
I still have some of the signature release. This is my last bottle of it, though.
That
I
is
like
such
it,
a
but
fine drop, Brian. I love the signature release.
I do too. I like it better than the Three Swallows, and I was
Honestly,
really
I do
sad
too.
when they discontinued it. When
Honestly, I like it better than regular John's Lane. I'm not gonna lie. I'll admit it.
it's got the it's just a really nice dram,
It really is. Yep.
or Tushkan as the case may be.
Yeah. I think the what's interesting, I don't know if anyone's done it. It's a little tougher too because you have to have them. But I mentioned earlier about doing the gold blend, the 40 verse 43. But you could
Mhm.
do the same thing with the John's Lane. You take
The side by side. Yeah.
the initial release in 2011, 12, that time frame versus like the current version, and they're and compare the differences.
And I'm sure you'll tell us this is for next year, but the same existed with Three Swallows.
Yeah, so it's just interesting how but I've had a lot of people, kind of comment on that because it same similar thing with the green spot when they changed that, but how the John's Lane is not maybe as heavy as it was when it was first launched.
We have done a side by side, and I've noticed that my old bottle is not like the new bottle,
Yeah.
in not only texture but character.
So
Someday I'm going to get this print framed. I actually have the book, an older copy from the 70s. It's obviously a reprint, so not the original. But a buddy of mine in Scotland actually picked it up for me for, believe it or not, 25 pounds.
yeah, I'm sure if you go into some old bookshops in
Dusty
some of these
bookshops.
rural
Yep.
You can
villages, you
find
can
good things,
find
yeah.
it. Yeah. Um, Ken, did you pick up a mirror recently? Or
I got a
sign?
Powers mirror, which was best-selling whiskey in Ireland one. So
Oh,
the Powers
nice.
mirror I really, really want is the one in Jack Ryan's pub. I saw that was lovely, but this one was a very nice one. It's an old one. So within the last 6 months, I've picked up an old Paddy's mirror and an old Powers mirror,
So
and
you're
they're both
talking about
excellent.
there's one in Beggar's Bush that you like?
Yes, that was lovely. If I see
Man
that, I
after
will
my own
buy it.
heart. Man after my own heart, Patty and Powers.
You need to you know,
Fine.
go with a little bit of a group and create a distraction and then just,
And steal the mirror now. And I
and then
We
love
can
run.
do it. We can do it. Set it up as
I,
a
I,
mission.
I love the mirror in John's background as
yeah,
well. That's a really nice one.
I was gonna say that's at the center of mine.
Yes.
Yeah, it's got all the counties
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I was
That's
happy
very nice.
How'd you get that? Did you get it in Ireland or somewhere here?
here in the States. I just got lucky and came across it. I'm trying to recall.
Uh,
I think it was. I don't know if it was in an old antique store. I think it was somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Or I don't know if it was antiques or just hodgepodge store.
Yeah.
But I was thrilled to find it. So built
Yeah.
the bar around it essentially.
The Paddy one, we were in an antique store and we were just looking at stuff. And I looked down, I was like, that's an old Paddy's mirror. And you could tell from the patina on it, it was old. I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
how much do you want for that? And it was a great price. I was like, I'll take it.
Damn, I wonder if there's somebody whose job it is to just hang out in all the rural areas of Ireland because if you've ever looked at any of the stats in the last 10 years, 20 years, the thousands of pubs that have closed in Ireland.
Oh, I'm sure there are people buying, and the next
Yeah, because every time a
Irish whiskey
pub
auctions is a memorabilia
closes,
one.
there's a
So, yeah.
Powers Mirror that becomes available.
I think the problem is paying for it to be shipped over here, so I'd rather look for something here.
Yeah. Well, you just have to carry it back.
I've done that. I've brought a bookcase back shipping once. I was very sensible. I filled it full of heavy things like jams and marmalades that would like because I was just paying for an oversized bag. I'm wrapping this bookcase.
There you go.
How do you declare a mirror when you're coming back?
They don't actually care about that.
Yeah, they don't
They
care.
don't-
But
they don't make baby mirrors.
it's not food or
No.
Yeah,
And for food, they only care about dairy or meat or fruit.
yeah. The
My
only
mother
problem with
declared
the
stuff
only
like that.
problem
We
with the
don't.
mirror is that, people have to look at your reflection. That's the
Mhm.
only problem with that on the declaring, right? Anybody heading over anytime soon?
Going back in October. So a few days in Ireland, going to France for a river cruise. I'll go to Le Maison de Whiskey in Golden Promise and drink old
Mhm.
Irish whiskey there. And then a few days in Ireland at the end of it. So October, November.
I'll be over in September.
And then hopefully going to Whiskey Live next year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's early, so I haven't released officially the save the date yet for the trip,
Yep.
but the trip will be in April, so it's going to be early next year.
I'll be tempted for your trip next year, unless I didn't know you by being on it. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. The trip will be interesting this year because it'll be in April, so it's a lot earlier than we've been running. So I don't know if that'll either
Cool and rainy.
introduce a new group,
Mhm.
or what. But all right, well,
All right, gentlemen.
I think
Yeah.
we'll call it I appreciate you guys jumping on. Again, like I said, I'd like to make this kind of an annual thing. Next year, the 31st
Yep.
is on a Saturday.
Even better.
But we can feature some different powers and who knows if maybe something new comes along too.
Well, thank you very much for organizing it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
thank
you,
you.
Alan, as always.
Was a lot of fun.
All right,
It
well,
was good.
thanks.
It was good hanging out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks,
thank
guys.
you.
Good
Thank you
seeing
all.
you
Have a
all.
great
Fantastic.
It was fun, guys. Good seeing you all.
See you
Thanks
next
again,
time.
Alan.
Have a good night.